It was a Tuesday morning when Earth's fate was sealed. The sun rose over a world unaware, casting golden light across the towering skyscrapers of New York City and the quiet plains of the Midwest. People went about their morning routines, commuters heading to work, children playing outside, and the hum of life carrying on. But that morning, it all stopped. The first sign of the invasion wasn't a flash or a bang, but a ripple, a distortion in the sky. It started as a shadow, barely noticeable to the untrained eye. But within minutes, the sky above every major city was filled with strange, immense shapes. Gigantic ships, hovering silently in the clouds, their outlines shimmering with an unnatural glow. The Elutar had arrived. For the first few moments, there was only confusion. Air traffic control across the globe scrambled, unable to make sense of the sudden appearance of ships that didn't belong in Earth's atmosphere. Military radar went haywire, unable to lock onto the incoming objects. Panic spread quickly, first through the governments, then through the public. It wasn't until the broadcast came that humanity truly understood the gravity of the situation. A smooth, unnerving voice, calm, yet laced with a chilling finality, echoed through the loudspeakers of every radio, television, and digital screen on the planet. People of Earth, we are the Elutar. You have been observed, and your primitive existence is no longer tolerable. Your world will be brought into the galactic order. Your people will serve as our subjects. You will bow, or you will burn. The message was followed by a display of power. The sky darkened as a wave of energy passed through Earth's orbit, knocking out satellites, disabling communication networks, and sending shockwaves through electrical grids worldwide. Within moments, major cities fell into darkness. No lights, no signals, only the eerie hum of the alien ships above. A few seconds later, the sounds of sirens and confusion filled the streets. World leaders attempted to respond, but the Elutar didn't care about diplomacy. Earth's leaders were nothing in their eyes, insignificant. To them, this wasn't negotiation, it was domination. A group of military commanders, including US General Rick Donnelly, gathered in secret war rooms across the globe. The moment had come. Some whispered about resistance, others talked of surrender, but in every corner of the earth, the same thought echoed. They were coming for us. And humanity was no longer sure if they could fight back. The world's governments were in disarray, caught between disbelief and fear. The United Nations convened an emergency session, but it was clear from the beginning that they were too divided, too fractured to respond with any real unity. Every nation had its own interests, and the Elutar were far too powerful to negotiate with unequal terms. President Claire Hargrove of the United States took charge, leading an urgent meeting with her top advisors in the Oval Office. General Rick Donnelly was among the first to speak, his voice gruff, his expression hard. They shut down our satellites, crippled our military communications. This isn't an invasion. It's an execution. What do you propose, General? President Hargrove asked, her eyes sharp, though her voice betrayed the wariness of a leader at the brink. We need to prepare for counterattack, but we need every nation on the same page. We can't fight them alone. Donnelly's words were met with silence. A military response would mean casualties, many of them. And the Elutar, from what little humanity had gathered, had technology far beyond what Earth's armies could even begin to match. Before they could discuss further, the door opened, and an unexpected visitor stepped into the room. Dr. David Grant, a leading astrophysicist and advisor on extraterrestrial relations, looked more disheveled than usual. His usually composed demeanor was now laced with urgency. "They've sent us a message," he said, his voice tight. The room fell silent again as Dr. Grant tapped his tablet, projecting the Elutar's message onto the walls. The image was chilling. Ariskan, the alien commander, standing tall with an otherworldly presence. His features were angular, with skin like polished stone and glowing eyes. His voice filled the room, cold and unyielding. People of Earth, we do not come to destroy your world, yet. Your history shows that your species has a tendency toward violence and chaos. This is your final chance to join the Galactic Order. Should you choose to comply, you will know peace, prosperity, and protection from the chaos of the universe. If you refuse, we will be forced to exterminate your kind. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The room was heavy with tension as each leader processed the ultimatum. In the quiet that followed, President Hargrove stood, her hands clenched at her sides. Extermination, she muttered under her breath. We can't give in. We won't. Her words were resolute, but deep down, she knew that humanity's survival was no longer a given. There was no turning back now. But somewhere in the world, a defiant voice was already rising, whispering the words that would change everything. We do not surrender. As the days passed, the air seemed to grow heavier. Fear and uncertainty permeated every corner of the globe. Governments, military forces, and civilian populations were paralyzed by the weight of the Elutar's ultimatum. The moment the message was broadcast, humanity was no longer in control of its fate. It was in the hands of an alien force that demanded obedience. But as the Elutar's ships hovered ominously above Earth, something unexpected began to stir. Across the world, in the shadows and back alleys, in the silence of underground bunkers, whispers began to circulate. Some called it rebellion. Others called it madness. But there were a few who called it what it really was, humanity's refusal to surrender. The first real signs of defiance came not from the world's military powers, but from ordinary people, hackers, veterans, engineers, and former soldiers who had spent their lives preparing for the worst. They hadn't expected an alien invasion, but they had always known that humanity's resilience would be its greatest strength. In a small apartment in New York City, Caleb Rivera, a former military strategist turned hacker, sat hunched over his computer. For weeks, he had been tracking Elutar signals, piecing together fragmented intelligence, and attempting to reverse engineer their communications. His screen flickered as encrypted messages came through from an anonymous source, a code used by resistance groups that had been quietly forming in secret. They were everywhere, from the desolate wastelands of the American heartland to the crowded, overpopulated streets of Mumbai. Caleb's fingers flew across the keyboard. Within minutes, he broadcasted a signal to every screen on Earth. We do not submit. He leaned back in his chair, watching as the message spread across the world, on smartphones, TVs, and computer screens. It was simple, raw, and powerful. There were no promises of victory, no grand speeches, just a declaration of humanity's defiance. The Elutar hadn't expected this. They believed humans were too divided, too weak, to unite under any cause. But they were wrong. In Chicago, Jack Turner, a former Marine and leader of a small militia group, watched Caleb's message flash on his screen. He didn't hesitate. This is it, Jack said to his team, a mixture of grizzled veterans and civilians who had come together after the invasion. The fight begins now. Around the world, in small gatherings and large crowds, people started to rally. Resistance cells formed. They were a fractured, disorganized force, but there was one thing that united them: the belief that Earth's survival depended on humanity's refusal to be ruled. The defiance had been lit, and there was no turning back now. The world wasn't just preparing for war. It was preparing to remind the stars what it meant to face human determination. Humanity's defiance was more than just words. It was now an unstoppable force, and the Elutar were starting to realize it. What had begun as isolated pockets of resistance in underground bunkers, in backwoods militia groups, and in defiant cities across the globe had begun to take shape as something more. A resistance movement was rising, fueled not only by rage, but by the unshakable resolve to protect Earth's sovereignty. But they were still far from prepared for what was coming. The first major confrontation occurred in the Midwest, near the wreckage of what had once been a top-secret U.S. military base. The Elutar had established a command post there, unaware that the resistance had already infiltrated the area. Jack Turner and his team were the ones who set the stage for humanity's first real victory. They had been working in secret, coordinating with groups around the world, building makeshift weapons from the alien technology they'd captured. Lucy Patterson, a brilliant hacker and engineer, had reverse-engineered the Elutar's energy shields, figuring out a way to disable them with human-made devices. The plan was simple: infiltrate the Elutar's base, disable their weapon systems, and then destroy their supplies. It was an incredibly risky move. There would be no reinforcements, no second chances. They had one shot at this. The night of the operation, Jack's team, along with a handful of resistance fighters, approached the base under cover of darkness, using a combination of stolen alien cloaking technology and tactical ingenuity. The plan was to plant explosive charges on key infrastructure, including the Elutar's central communications relay, but even with the element of surprise on their side, there was no guarantee they would make it out alive. The first sign that something was wrong came when one of their scouts triggered a motion sensor. Alarms blared, and in the blink of an eye, the base was on high alert. But Jack didn't hesitate. He knew what had to be done. They moved quickly, weaving through the maze of corridors, using homemade EMP grenades to disable alien security systems. As they reached the central command center, the Elutar responded with overwhelming force, plasma weapons lighting up the hallway like streaks of lightning. One of Jack's team, a soldier named Sam Carter, was hit. He dropped to the ground, blood pouring from a wound in his side, but he shouted to the others, "Go, finish it." With a final push, they planted the charges, then made their escape. The explosion that followed was like nothing they had ever seen. An entire section of the base was obliterated, taking out not just their communications, but a significant portion of the Elutar's weaponry. It wasn't just a victory, it was a message. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. As Jack and his team disappeared into the night, they knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. And now the Elutar would understand just how much they underestimated humanity's capacity for resistance. The Elutar were not easily deterred. The destruction of their base in the Midwest was a blow, but it was hardly a fatal one. Within hours, their fleets began mobilizing, and their reprisals were swift and brutal. Earth's resistance, still fractured and uncoordinated, found itself thrust into a deadly game of survival. The first of the retaliatory strikes came at dawn. Massive Elutar warships descended from the clouds, their dark forms blotting out the sun as they unleashed wave after wave of energy blasts. Cities across the world were targeted, but it was London that bore the brunt of the attack. The aliens zeroed in on critical infrastructure, obliterating entire districts and leaving millions in the dark, both literally and figuratively. Power grids were destroyed. Hospitals were wiped out. Transportation systems came to a standstill. The message was clear: submit or perish. In Washington, President Claire Hargrove convened another emergency meeting with her military and intelligence leaders. The destruction in London, followed by similar assaults in Paris, Beijing, and Rio de Janeiro, had shaken her to the core. Her resolve was unbroken, but her advisors were split on the next course of action. "We can't keep playing catch-up," General Rick Dorrelly argued, slamming a fist on the table. "We have to hit them where it hurts. We need to strike back with everything we've got." But Dr. David Grant, the astrophysicist, spoke up, his voice grim. "They've crippled our space capabilities. We're blind to their movements. We can't fight what we can't see. We need intel, and we need it fast." The problem was that the Elutar had far more advanced technology than humanity could even begin to comprehend. Their ability to manipulate gravity, bend light, and disrupt electromagnetic fields made them nearly impossible to track. The humans, despite their growing resistance, were always a step behind. Meanwhile, on the streets of New York, a different kind of resistance was taking shape. Lucy Patterson and Caleb Rivera had begun working with underground tech groups, developing new tools to fight back. They had cracked the encryption on alien transmissions, and through these hacked signals, they discovered something. The Elutar's communication network had a weak point. It wasn't much, just a single vulnerability in their otherwise flawless system. But it was enough. If they could exploit it, they might be able to disrupt the Elutar's coordination, throwing them into disarray long enough for humanity to strike back. The catch? The vulnerability was located deep in an Elutar-controlled city, heavily guarded, and almost certainly a suicide mission. But for the Resistance, this was the moment they had been waiting for. If they could pull it off, it would change the tide of the war. Humanity would prove, once and for all, that it wasn't just surviving, it was fighting back. As the world braced for the next move, the Resistance prepared for their boldest strike yet. A few would die. Many more would fight. And the Elutar, for the first time, would begin to question their assumption that humans were too weak to resist. The Resistance had learned a hard lesson from the Elutar's brutal retaliation. They were no longer just a loose coalition of civilians and soldiers. They had become something more, an organized force united by a single truth: Earth would never bow to invaders. But despite their growing strength, the Elutar were still overwhelmingly powerful, and humanity was running out of time. The turning point came when Lucy Patterson, with Caleb Rivera's help, managed to breach a major component of the Elutar's communications grid. After weeks of painstaking work, they discovered the vulnerability, a gap in the frequency modulation used by the alien fleet to coordinate their movements. The Elutar, in their arrogance, had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to learn from their mistakes. Lucy's breakthrough was nothing short of extraordinary. She managed to hijack the Elutar's signal and broadcast a warning to all resistance groups. Their network is fractured. They're blind to us now. The message went viral among the underground, igniting a firestorm of activity. Humanity's various factions, now working more in unison than ever before, prepared for a global counteroffensive. General Rick Dorrelly, who had been coordinating with the United States military and NATO forces, immediately moved to capitalize on the opportunity. "We've got one shot at this," he said, his voice tight with determination. "We need to hit them hard and fast, all over the world. Take out their supply chains, their command centers, and their fleet." The plan was risky, an all-out assault on the Elutar's remaining infrastructure. It required total coordination, and the clock was ticking. A window of only 48 hours was all they had before the aliens' network could reset itself. If humanity couldn't strike first, they would lose the advantage, and the Elutar would retaliate with even more lethal force. The Resistance's biggest challenge wasn't the alien ships in the sky, it was the unpredictability of their targets. The Elutar's base in the Midwest had been an invaluable victory, but the real war was now on the ground. The cities that had once been symbols of human life were now battlegrounds, where every building, every street corner could either be a death trap or a strategic advantage. In Chicago, Jack Turner and his group of former soldiers rallied their forces, preparing for their most dangerous mission yet. They were going to infiltrate an Elutar fleet base, a heavily fortified area near the ruins of what was once the Great Lakes. Jack looked at his team, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "We get them fast, we get them hard. We don't stop until we cripple them." For the first time since the Elutar's arrival, there was a real hope that victory was possible. Not just survival, but a chance to reclaim their world. In the skies above, the Elutar watched. Their fleet, once impervious, now felt vulnerable. The question had shifted. Could they crush humanity's will to resist before it was too late? The Elutar had always believed they were invincible, an ancient technologically advanced species with the power to bend entire civilizations to their will. They had conquered worlds before without so much as breaking a sweat. But humanity was different. They refused to bend, refused to break, and, against all odds, had learned to fight back. The strike against their communications network, followed by a string of successful assaults on their key installations, had caught the Elutar off guard. For the first time, they began to realize they might be up against something more than a primitive species. They were facing a force that would never surrender, no matter the cost. Aruskan, the Elutar warlord, stood at the helm of his flagship, the Oblivion, his face cold and unreadable as he surveyed the reports. His fleet was in disarray. Key supply lines had been severed. His command posts had been infiltrated, his generals killed, his ships disabled. The human resistance was growing bolder by the day. There was no longer any denying it. The campaign to subjugate Earth had gone horribly wrong. In a moment of frustration, Aruskan called a council of his most trusted commanders aboard the Oblivion. The holographic map of Earth, once dotted with red lights marking Elutar-controlled zones, was now riddled with gaps, spaces where the human resistance had pushed through. "We have failed," Aruskan admitted, his voice barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of defeat. His subordinates, unaccustomed to failure, protested. "The humans are weak. This is only temporary. We will crush them," one of his generals insisted. "We still have the fleet. We still have the firepower too." "No," Aruskan cut him off. His sharp eyes glinted with an emotion that wasn't anger, but something more dangerous, fear. "We cannot afford to waste more resources on this planet. They have outsmarted us, and now they have the initiative. If we do not retreat, we will face total annihilation." The alien fleet, which had once been an unstoppable force, was now fractured. Without Aruskan's tight control, his commanders squabbled over the next course of action. Some proposed retreating, others suggested launching a final, all-out strike. But the unity that had once bound the Elutar together was gone. Without leadership, without coordination, their superiority in technology became irrelevant. Meanwhile, across the globe, humanity sensed the shift. The Elutar were on the defensive for the first time. Jack Turner's team, now operating deep within enemy territory, relayed the news to their commanders. "They're weakening. We've got them on the ropes." In Washington, President Claire Hargrove received the message with a mix of relief and steely resolve. She knew that the war wasn't over yet, but this was the moment. The time had come to press the advantage, to strike the final blow. The battle for Earth was far from won, But humanity had proven something the Ilútar had never anticipated. Humans were capable of fighting for their world, and they would do whatever it took to ensure they would never be ruled again. The fall of the Ilútar had begun. The resistance had given everything. They'd fought through the darkest hours, facing not only the most advanced alien force Earth had ever known, but the very real threat of extinction. But now, with the Ilútar's once mighty fleet in retreat and their command structure in chaos, humanity stood on the precipice of victory, or total annihilation. It all came down to one final strike. The Ilútar, retreating into the shadows of their command ships and fortresses, had underestimated the one thing they could never understand: the depth of human will. The resistance, no longer a scattered group of insurgents, but a unified, highly trained force, had a singular goal now: to end this war once and for all. General Rick Donnelly, now in command of a coalition force from the United States, Europe and Asia, had assembled the largest military operation ever seen on Earth. The target was the Ilútar flagship, the Oblivion, a massive warship that dwarfed anything humanity had ever encountered. It was the heart of their fleet, the symbol of their power, and their last chance at domination. But the humans were ready. They had carefully studied the Ilútar's tactics, reverse-engineered their technology, and most importantly, adapted. Caleb Rivera's team had hacked into their weapon systems and disrupted their defensive grids. Lucy Patterson had devised a plan to infiltrate the Oblivion from below, planting explosive charges on its core reactors. And Jack Turner's militia group had secured a critical route for the outer defenses, prepared to face whatever stood between them and their final objective. The moment of truth arrived when humanity's forces launched a coordinated assault, a multi-pronged attack that stretched from the cities to the stars. Across the globe, airfields buzzed with activity as fighter jets and drones took off, targeting Ilútar orbital platforms. Resistance cells struck in every major city, disrupting communications and forcing the alien fleet into disarray. On the ground, Jack's team stormed the last bastion of the Ilútar's defensive perimeter in the ruins of what had once been Detroit. Gunfire and explosions tore through the streets as they fought their way toward the Oblivion. Amidst the chaos, the world held its breath. Inside the alien flagship, Ariskan stood before the holomap, his face pale. He had already given the order to withdraw, but it was too late. The charge had been set, the countdown had begun. A massive explosion rocked the core of the Oblivion, the shockwave reverberating across the atmosphere. The warship, the symbol of Ilútar dominance, erupted in a blinding flash of light. In the sky above, humanity's forces cheered. The last of the Ilútar fleet, their greatest weapon, had been destroyed. It wasn't just a victory, it was liberation. Across the globe, in the streets, in the bunkers, and in the hearts of every human being, there was only one thought: Earth was free. The Ilútar had underestimated humanity's will to survive, and now the invaders were gone. The war was over, and humanity had won.